Our Mayberry birthday. Well, not today, but today our card is going around for Barb Mayberry, but we don't have Ann, so we're not going to sing happy birthday to you, but one of these times we're going to call on Alice to sing happy birthday. All right, so I have lots of thank yous that I owe people today, so I just want to thank everybody who helped support our Heritage Dinner. It turned out very well for us, and just thank you to everybody. We had a wonderful program at 3 o'clock about our canon. I hope that you were there and that you saw that. Dick Hunau deserves such great credit for that. He saw the restoration of the canon all the way through from beginning to end. He even sponsored a lot of it. He made friends with our expert from the Rock Island Arsenal, Mr. Bob Foster, who came and he did so much research on that weapon, and he came and he talked, and he was really fun and enjoyable and really gave us a good program. So thank you to them. Linda Tubbs, who did a wonderful brown bag lunch about her father, L.L. Long. Earlier this year, came back and did just a short presentation since we'd already had brown bag lunch, and we installed L.L. Long, Superintendent of Schools, into our Hall of Fame, and that was very nice, and we certainly thank her for that. We had a wonderful silent auction thanks to Marcella Henneke and maybe Pat and Kara. So you know we raised $1,052 at our silent auction at the Heritage Dinner. So for everyone who participated in that, again, we thank you for that. I know that we sold over 450 tickets to our dinner. I know that we served 415 people, so there were a few people that donated their tickets, I guess. Okay, and so that was neat, and we want to thank Geronimo's because they do such an awesome job each year with their meal. It's always a wonderful meal. They charge us only for what we serve, and they just do a great job for us, and Anita is wonderful. So thank you to them. I have to thank Dixie and Carolyn for all the wonderful decorating, and Jerry Evans helped, I think, made some of the things for the decorations, and Jack Willie. And so between most of the four of them, it looked really nice in there. So anyway, thank you for that. And to all of you who donated desserts, we really appreciated that because that doesn't come with a Geronimo's meal, and yet, you know, what's a banquet without a dessert? So anyway, thank you to everybody. It was a really wonderful event for us. Okay. Next week, Brown Bag's Lunch is going to be Sue Mayberry. She tries to come and do it on our board meeting days to give me a little bit of a space. And this time she's going to be talking about Maquoketa's missing medieval mirror. And I don't know if you've heard of that. It was last seen at the Maquoketa Centennial Celebration in 1938. And it's just a mystery where it is now. But at that time, of the 1938, it was 401 years old. So she's going to be talking about that, and then she'll have lots of photos and lots of information about Maquoketa's Centennial Celebration in 1938. Okay? And so then today, we're going to talk about part 2. Heard somebody say that? Part 2 of the program that we had a few weeks ago about the Luce family, the Branch family, and the wonderful manuscript. And if anybody wants to look, I have a copy of it here. Handwritten manuscript, 30 pages, that was donated to Francilia by her mother. And we talked mostly about that last time, and so today we're going to talk about this couple up here. But it's just a wonderful thing, a document that was at the Maquoketa Library that they donated to us, I believe, in 1969. And it's just a wonderful thing to read. And part of the joy in that is that it starts with Mary's, well, let's see. It starts with Mary's talking about her parents, who were Elijah and Sally Thompson Branch. They were born right after the Revolutionary War. So this takes us on a trip from Revolutionary War times through Civil War times when Mary's own family was being raised, and down to the time of Francilia, her daughter, who married Dr. David Luce of Maquoketa. And so this is part 2 of that. But it's just an awesome manuscript, and I hope everybody at some point reads the whole thing. So Mary talked about the hardships of her pioneer life, and it was just so well written that you can't help but just feel their struggles as you read it. And just how the family moved west because they were from Massachusetts. The soil was poor and rocky, and they could barely scratch out a living to feed their families. So they were ever moving west. They went to Ohio. And so, but one thing that I would like to call attention to everyone is that down through the generations of these 3 generations of people, and the struggles that they had depending on the time, one thing that they had in common was that they had this intense desire to see that their children received a good education. And it was, you know, finances were really, really meager back then, and families were large. So it wasn't like they could afford to send their kids away to college, okay? They inspired their children to work hard and to make the sacrifice, and they had to make their education happen themselves. A common thread again through this, and I don't have a, oh no. Oh no. Isn't that wonderful? Sorry, I don't know what I did wrong, but hopefully we'll fix it. I need a clicker changer, and ours died. And so I try to use this, and it doesn't work well, so forgive me. Okay, common denominator in all of these generations is this, and that's the early Congregational Church in Maquoketa. Of course, it's the UCC church now, and it looks a little different than it did. But again, it's the common thread, and in one way, it's because of the Milliken family. And you know, we've talked about Reverend Silas Milliken many times, how painstakingly poor they were, and yet he himself and his wife and all 6 of their children managed to graduate from Oberlin College in Ohio. And of course we know that Robert Milliken went on to become our Nobel Prize winner, award-winning in physics, and Oberlin College played a big part in his education as well as the Spitzer family, and was the reason that these people ended up here to begin with. And so we know that Francilia came here and met Dr. Luce. They were married, and they spent the rest of their days making Maquoketa a much better place. So if you were to turn to that 1879 history of Jackson County, you'd find the following about Dr. D.M. Luce. His name was David Luce. And it would continue. Dr. Luce is among the intelligent, highly educated, and successful physicians of Jackson County. He's a native of Myerstown, Lebanon County, Pennsylvania. After a preparatory course of study, he entered Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And there he graduated, and he entered the medical department of the University of Pennsylvania, and he graduated in 1877. And shortly after that, he moved to Zowingle, Iowa. And he entered the practice of medicine there, became a member of the Dubuque County Medical Society, and according to the 1879 history, he was a man of pleasing address and affable manners. He has secured the confidence and respect of all with whom he is acquainted. Well then, if you go to the 1889 history, the portrait and biographical album, he's not even there. And so you wonder why. But then you realize it's not really a surprise, because we have to remind ourselves to be in that book, in that history book, that one had to pay to be part of that book. They had to pay, and they had to submit their own material and their own write-up. So, as you can imagine, a lot that's in there is a little self-serving, as people kind of tooted their own horn, and those who didn't wish to toot their own horn just were not in the book. So he's not in that book. But by the time the 1910 history of Jackson County came along, and it was printed, the Ellis edition, Dr. Luce is listed as the coroner of Jackson County, and he served in that position from 1882 to 1886. So, but there's a lot yet to be learned about this great man. The first thing that he did when he came to town was to start a pharmacy business. But as you try to look up his history, I was only able to find a few memories that he shared through his years, and only one photograph, which you will see. That's all I can come up with for him, one photograph. But he always told the story of how, while he was still living in Philadelphia, he was fortunate enough to receive a reporter's pass to our country's centennial of 1876, right? And because he had a pass, he was able to go often. And so he attended frequently, and he made really good use of that. But one of the things that really impressed him during that time was the Alexander Graham Bell exhibit. So Alexander Graham Bell had just invented the telephone, and he had this exhibit set up where he had telephones in two booths, 100 and some feet apart, and people could go in and for the first time talk on a phone, and everyone was amazed. But he remembered how the Emperor Pedro of Brazil was there at the time, and how impressed he was, and he spent so much time in the booth talking to his various subjects that nobody else could kind of get a chance. So that's one thing that he remembered. Okay, so he received his medical degree from the University of Pennsylvania in 1877, and he practiced medicine in Quincy for a short time, in Quincy, Michigan. But upon hearing from a cousin that the people of Zwingle, Iowa needed a physician, packed his belongings in a buggy, he hitched up his faithful mare named Peggy, and on October 30th of 1877 he set forth. And he found the farm families and the residents of Zwingle to be wonderful, grateful, law-abiding citizens. Most of his calls were made in the saddle, and as he passed other riders, they'd give the new doctor an encouraging wave of the arm and the bottle. I don't know what that meant. He moved to Maquoketa in 1882, and then he was married October 11th of 1883 to Francilia Josephine Spitzer, whose mother was Mary, right? And they were married at her hometown in Medina, Ohio, and like I said, they lived the rest of their lives in Maquoketa. Well, Dr. Luce was known for his drugstore on Main Street in Maquoketa, and we know from our research by Helen Stoddard, who's a name that you all know, that the very first drugstore in Maquoketa was A. Fellows and Company. And according to the 1879 directory, he was the pioneer in this area of the drug business, in this whole part of the country, as a matter of fact. And he started his drug stores as early as 1853. His store in Maquoketa was on the west side of Main Street between Platt and Pleasant. And you can see from this advertisement that they carried a wide assortment of items for the early settler. This is a lot of neat things for people to be able to buy in a little pioneer town in 1853. And though we don't have a picture of the drugstore itself, we have a picture of their ad. So, according to Helen Stoddard, the next pharmacy that came along was Dr. G.S. Martin, 1864. And he'd been a country doctor here since 1848. And he became well known because he had invented or made or put together several nationally known patented medicines. Like one of them was Dr. Martin's cough cure. And this is the season coming up. Some of us will probably wish we had some of that. The other thing that he secured a national reputation for was Dr. Martin's tonic and blood purifier. So I was going to go to the other building and see if we had any bottles left that had been turned in, but I didn't get that far, but I bet we might have. So then, In 1879, we know that there were 4 drugstores in the little town of Maquoketa in 1879. And not only that, there were 6 physicians here that also dispersed medicines. So there was no shortage of medication in early Maquoketa. D.N. Luce and Company was established, and this was at 126 South Main Street in 1882. Though on the photo it said 1896, but I think that's incorrect. So the man you see here on the photo is reported to be Dr. Luce, so maybe we have 2 pictures. And in 1900, there was an ad in the Maquoketa Record newspaper advertising, and this is kind of strange, "A chest protector in times saves pneumonia sometimes." And that was in quotations. And so evidently he developed something that helped people with pneumonia. And then it said, "Call on D.M. Luce and Company, the druggists." So we know that he was there for a very long time, and later he sold part of his business to John Nitschke. So this is the very same building, a little later, and notice this little aerial, I think they're called, up above. So that helps you recognize where that store is in downtown Maquoketa, okay? So, where is it?
That's not there anymore.
Yes, it is. Oh, did you take out the front?
Well, that was taken out in the 70s, and now there's a big round top window.
No, you're in the wrong building, I think.
136.
Because,
126?
okay, because the Centennial building has the big round thing.
The one next.
I think, but maybe not. We'll see as we go along. You keep thinking there, Ted.
Okay.
Okay, so he sold part of his partnership to Nitschke. And then in 1889, Hugo Stack, who is right here, he was a man from here that worked for Luce and Nitschke. He was an apprentice druggist there for some time. And then after several years, he left to attend pharmaceutical school. And when he came back, Dr. Luce sold his share to him in 1908. And then it became Nitschke and Stack, the drugstore. So these pharmacies that we had 2 and 3 in a row, where the art experience is now basically, right? They have quite a genealogy all of their own. And it's hard to follow because they didn't just sell out to a completely different company. They did it in halves by partnerships. So one name stayed and the other name changed, and it just becomes really confusing. But in 1910, it became Nitschke and Stack. Well then, as you can see here, this is Emery Hinckley and Hugo Stack, as we said, right? Then entered Edward Luckish. And he became involved in 1914 because he purchased the Nitschke half of Stack and Luckish was formed. And then it finally became Hancher's Pharmacy in 1969 it became Osterhaus. That was the first Osterhaus one. So Edward Luckish is just kind of interesting to me because he was the brother of Edward Luckish. No, he was the brother of Matthew Luckish, and he was our other really famous, world-renowned scientist. He graduated from Maquoketa High School in 1899. He was known as the father of light, and one of a couple people around the world that are credited with inventing the fluorescent light. So we've had some remarkable people graduate from Maquoketa High School in the late 1800s. We had wonderful, wonderful schools. Okay. So this is so maybe Norma remembers this. This is a new photo to me that I think Norma added to our collection that had belonged to Nancy Bullock Longwell. Remember? And this is 124 South Main Street, and again, there we are. Okay? It was a drugstore. This drugstore was started in 1868 by Dr. Truax. Then it was owned by Maynard, Orcott, and Hayes, and next Orcott and Doe, and then by Walter Doe, A lot of you are familiar with that name. But by 1903, it was Broxham and Hinckley. And by 1932, it was Hinckley's Drugstore, which I think a lot of us remember. And in 1965, it became, well, first, it became the first part of the Osterhaus Pharmacy. But I hadn't seen that, I had not seen this picture before. Norma snuck it in on me. And there is the Lyric Theater that we talked about, and we know that the Lyric Theater was in the Centennial Building. So at that time, this was at least part of the Centennial Building. And then this was the drugstore, and you can see what's written there. And then this said drugs, so there was so this is a mystery photo, okay? We have a lot to learn about this photo. So this is 1950s, so many of us remember this. Okay, so you can see where the Schultz-Stein store was. There again is this, right? Okay, and so this is, at this time in 1950, this is Hancher's drugstore, and then Hinckley's drugstore, and then my alma mater, the Green Mill. I spent a lot of time there until I did. And so, anyway, that's just kind of a hierarchy of how pharmacies involved in Maquoketa. And Mr. Osterhaus will tell you it's quite something and quite notable. Okay?
The two buildings in the middle, Hinckley's and
Hancher's? These two?
Those two buildings were built in the 1880s, and they were always pharmacies until Osterhaus moved.
Okay, thank you for that. For adding that.
And as a result, as you can attest, pharmacists never threw anything away. It all got carried upstairs and parked. And there were artifacts up there going into the 1800s, 80s, and 90s. But that protruding window was taken off in the 70s and replaced with a larger window.
Okay, and this is what we call the Centennial Building with the arc up above, am I correct?
That is a Centennial Building, which had a ballroom in the upper level.
And that's all been restored, and that's apartments now up above?
No. The Centennial Building is as it was built. It's got the original wallpaper in the ballroom. It's not been restored.
Okay.
The apartments are in the two pharmacy buildings and the Green Mill Building.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I've been up there, but it's hard to understand where you are when you're up there.
Yeah, you need a guide.
So, just a question. What happened to all those wonderful artifacts going back to the 1800s?
The ones that were salvageable are in the ballroom.
Okay.
And it still belongs to Osterhaus Pharmacy because it is medicinal products.
Okay. So I remember that some of us from the Historical Society went up there, and we picked out a lot of things that were going to one day come to us.
There's still a pile up there with your name on it.
Okay. And there were some wonderful things up there, so don't forget us, okay? Because this is a great part of our history, but those things take a lot of time, I understand that. But this is one of my favorite photos of Maquoketa because it's awesome. But I did not realize that this disappeared in 1970, so thank you.
We used some of these photos that you're showing when we did the front renovation.
Okay.
And the discussion about replacing that bay window got to be over 6 figures to replace it.
Wow.
It cost over $100,000 because of the structure. And that was the reason it was taken down, is because it was either going to be taken down or fall off. And when they put the metal facade on the front of the buildings in the 70s.
Okay, thank you.
And there's another picture you had earlier. The Green Mill Building had
This one?
That one shows that the windows in the Green Mill Building have the round top on them. So
it does,
when we did the renovations, we replaced those with the round top windows.
Okay, thank you.
Redid the masonry and made it right.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And then I just want to call your attention to this. Ringlip Hardware store, maybe, that was up there for years. And when they renovated, They tried so hard to disappear it. And a little of it still showed, but I begged for the Historical Society's sake for them to lay that up there. But it didn't. You can see how much weight I had. It did not. It didn't happen. They erased this. And I just thought,
They power washed it.
yeah, it needed to stay there. It was wonderful. Wonderful part of our history. Okay, I don't have a clue where I am. But those were all important things. Thank you. Thank you for adding all that. Okay, so let's go back to Dr. Luce. We just had to deviate a little bit because for over 26 years, Dr. Luce was part of the pharmacy business in downtown Maquoketa. So that's kind of the reason for that. So Dr. Luce, he'd been here for quite a while, but in 1884, he went east for further medical schooling. And I'll have to say, of all of the country doctors or the older doctors that we have, he perhaps was the most educated because he kept going places to learn more. 1884, he went to Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. In 1905, he went to Mayo Clinic to have schooling and to learn. And he was so impressed by the quality of doctors that Mayo had acquired. And he said it's evidenced by the number of physicians that go there for treatment. If you want to go to a place that's a really good hospital, go to where the doctors go. That was his point. This is a direct quote from his notes that we have from 1905. Naturally, we look for reasons why these men who have no extraordinary institutional training, that's the doctors at Mayo, doing their work in an obscure place, oops, sorry, I'm making it worse. Okay, doing their work in an obscure place, removed from large centers of population, with exceptionally poor railroad facilities, are attaining such a large degree of success. So I don't know how it is now, but back in the day, it was difficult to get to Mayo Clinic. The trains didn't go there. It was just hard to get to. I hope that's improved. Is that improved? Okay. So, but back then, it was amazing that they had such a large degree of success, he says. I believe that the correct answer is unassuming personal manners, careful diagnosis, using all modern methods for which they have a corps of able assistants and conscientious workers. Go thou and do likewise, end quote. So he was a great fan of Mayo Clinic and what they were able to do. And then Dr. Luce, just before World War I, left on another learning trip. He went to Vienna, Austria for postgraduate work. But each time he went to these wonderful places to learn, he came back to Maquoketa and continued his practice. Okay, so we see here the Maquoketa Library, which you all recognize. In 1904, the library was assured a permanent home through a $10,000 gift from Andrew Carnegie. Now, Andrew Carnegie had already given 40 library buildings in Iowa alone. 40, that's a lot. For their part, the people of Maquoketa had to raise $3,715. Carnegie's gift was the building. Our part was to purchase the land and the fixtures for the building. But the man leading the charge to get a library in Maquoketa and in contact with Carnegie was Dr. David Luce. He answered all the pertinent questions to secure such a building here. He served as liaison between the Carnegie people and the Maquoketa City Council. In 1902, the citizens of Maquoketa voted 4-1 to approve the required library tax of not less than $1,000 per year. And at that time, 16 people in Maquoketa pledged $50 each to purchase the land that he had secured years before, believing that one day it should become the library site. So that's telling you that Dr. Luce, years before the public library came, he saw that lot where the library is today, and in his mind, that was where the library needed to be, and what a perfect choice it was, right? So then later, another $2,500 was received from Mr. Carnegie, making his actual gift $12,500. And it was predicted when complete with heat and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the site would have cost $16,000. So that was our wonderful library. And the one of the people, maybe I can't say the person most responsible, but one of the most responsible people for that library was our Dr. David Luce, okay? So I don't know if you can see that very well. This is the dedication of the library that took place in January of 1904. And you'll see down at the bottom on the far side, Dr. Luce is listed as a member of the Board of Trustees. Years later, when Francilia passed away, because she was very involved as well, he established the Francilia Luce Memorial Book Fund, and I think we mentioned this last time, with a $4,000 donation in 1942. And it said that through the years, this fund was used to purchase reference books and other non-fiction books chosen by the library's book committee. And then in 1950, just 2 years before his death, Dr. Luce again presented the library a gift of $6,000 in bonds and things. So he was one of the great, great supporters of the Maquoketa Library and just deserves so much credit. Okay, he retired at the age of 80 in 1935 after having been a physician and surgeon in Jackson County for 53 years. Dr. Luce was one of the key figures in advocating for the erection of a county hospital here. He actually died a couple of years in 1952 before it opened, before it became a reality, but he was one of the main drivers behind Maquoketa or Jackson County having a fine public hospital. He and Francilia were prominent in the Congregational Church here that we kind of started out with, and Dr. Luce served as a trustee of that organization, and he was part of their Centennial Committee of 1943. Dr. Luce was still living in Maquoketa at the age of 90, and there was a little article in the local paper which referred to him as the venerable doctor who preferred to travel by air. And he was about to fly to Ohio to visit relatives, and he had made trips to Florida and to California, everything by air, which was unusual back then. And he had been wintering in Orlando, Florida for several years, and coming back here. In 1950, on his 95th birthday, he was honored with a large article in the Alumni Magazine of the University of Pennsylvania as their oldest living alumni. At that time, they reported that he was in excellent health, he had a fine sense of humor, and an excellent memory for both recent and past events. And then the article was reprinted in the Maquoketa Community Press. And it quotes Dr. Luce as saying that one of his earliest memories of his life was the sound of cannon fire from the Battle of Gettysburg, which was audible from his home in Myersville, Pennsylvania. While he was there, he heard Horace Greeley repeat his famous, "Go west, young men, go west," and an address to the student body. He felt this was a factor which later guided him to Michigan and then finally to Iowa as a young physician. Horace Greeley. So we have in our collection, we don't have a lot of things of the Luces, but we have a memorial card for Dr. Luce. He spent his life, the last year of his life, he did spend in Orlando, Florida. He died there in June 30th of 1952 at the age of 96. His survivors, he and Francilia had no children of their own, but his survivors included a number of nieces and nephews. Memorial services were held in the Maquoketa Congregational Church. His ashes were returned to Halak O'Hara Funeral Home, and he and his wife, Francilia, who passed away quite a bit earlier, October 9th of 1938, are in the Mount Hope Cemetery Mausoleum. So, talk a little bit about his wife, Francilia, who deserves to be a member of our Hall of Fame in her own right, I believe. We learned a lot about her in the memoirs of her mother, Mary, that we talked about 2 or 3 weeks ago. But we know that she came from great pioneer stock. In case you weren't here, she was born in Medina, Ohio, July 3rd, 1859, because her parents, like I said, had moved from Massachusetts looking for richer farmland. She was the sixth child in a family of 3 sons and 5 daughters. In 1879, she graduated from Oberlin College and took a trip to Wyoming, Iowa. She came here to visit her sister, who was the wife of Captain Loomis, who was a Civil War veteran. And he was held in quite high esteem as a hero of the Civil War. And through his influence, he made application in her name for a position at Maquoketa High School. And she got the job. And she taught Latin in our high school from 1880 to 1882. And I'm thinking that, you know, she might have even taught Robert Millikan because he graduated in 1885. She later became assistant principal of Maquoketa High School. That's saying something. And certainly she and Millikan would have been appointed through their membership in the Congregational Church. So it all just ties in together. Like we said, October 11th, 1883, Francelia married Dr. David Luce in Medina, Ohio, and they lived their entire life in Maquoketa, though they traveled a lot. Okay, so hard to see maybe, this is a passport of one of many passports that we have. Dr. and Mrs. Luce taken in 1826, one of the few photographs that we have of them. Our folder, our files have really very little information about her, even about him for that matter. Just several passports showing their travels around the world. A couple things that are there that I'd like to show you just for fun. This is a postcard. So trying to figure out what this was, and you can help me here. I'm thinking that this is a little ship called a little boat called the Louisa, something or other. And that in that basket, if you look carefully, there are people in that basket, are there not? Okay, so I think that they were on some sort of a trip, a cruise or something, and getting ready to go for a hot air balloon ride. But how would anybody see out of that basket? So I don't quite understand. Does anybody know about hot air balloon rides? But you can just definitely see people's hats, people standing here in the basket. You can see where the ropes are attached to the basket. I don't know how they got in there. And I don't know how they could see anything if they went up into the air, but there's got to be a story here, and I bet that maybe someone might know. But they did many, many things in their travels around the world. Another postcard, and this is one of their passports to Australia, but I think this postcard probably does not go with it. I didn't know if they had deserts and camels in Australia, but anyway, they went many places and they experienced much in their lives. And then they brought their education back and shared it with people here.
That's unusual. The passport is a joint.
And all of their passports are. Does that not happen now?
Oh, no, it'd be individual now.
Okay, all of their passports are joint. And the pictures are joint pictures, like the one on the opening slide is their passport picture, because that's all we have. And yeah, so I hadn't thought about that was a difference. Okay, so one of the things that Mrs. Luce is mentioned in the 1910 Alice history, and she is mentioned as one of the originators of the Outlook Club. Now Maquoketa had an Outlook Club. Their first meeting in Maquoketa was in 1894, and thus they hold the honor of being the oldest club in Maquoketa that was organized for literary work. She was one of 3 people chosen to prepare the first course of study, which was called A Tour of the Mediterranean. That year they studied Greece and the surrounding area. In 1898 to 1900, they studied the United States. They had many guest speakers, including 6 members of the club that had been European travelers. And then, as I said, they came home and they shared their adventures with what they called the stay-at-homes. So, and I don't think that they meant that as a bad connotation. I think that that was just, you know, they were just the people to talk about this. We know that Francilia would have been a big part of the planning of the library club room in the basement, right? Is that where they have their public meetings now, Karen?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so you all been to wonderful meetings at the public library in the basement in that room? That's the room that we're talking about, okay? Francilia, she must have been a big part of the planning of that room. Maybe she even helped to choose the furniture, because as you see the beautiful white wicker furniture, that's all in the museum now. So that's upstairs in the museum. So, perhaps she had something to do with that. And she certainly would have known Karen's predecessor, Miss Simpson. Maybe she even had a part in hiring Miss Simpson, who knows. So I put in one other old picture, maybe two, no, maybe one, of our beautiful library. And I think it's so wonderful that much of the old part of the library looks exactly like it did historically. And that's Miss Simpson. Okay, something I don't understand, and I'm hoping that maybe somebody knows the answer. And sorry, this is a poor newspaper newspaper print. But in March 7th of 1848, on the campus of Grinnell College, Grinnell, Iowa, an official opening of Luce Hall took place. It's under construction. It was the campus's newest women's dormitory. It was built with a $100,000 endowment from Dr. David N. Luce, then 93. It was state-of-the-art, built to house 84 upper-class women. The article states that the $485,000 structure was financed in part by the gift of the late Francilia Spitzer Luce, Iowa pioneer educator, and her husband, Dr. David Luce of Maquoketa, for whom the building is named. But I haven't been able to figure out the connection between the Luce family and Grinnell College. They didn't go to school there. So I think it would be really interesting for us to find out what the connection was, that they made such a wonderful donation, such a huge donation for the time to Grinnell College. There has to be an answer out there. Anyway, and then this is a photograph of the reception lounge, of the lounge, I guess, that it was completed. But you can see it was a very nice facility. But they didn't have children, but they chose to do really, really wonderful things with the money that they made. So the last thing we'll talk about is their beautiful home. So this is a later picture, and I think the house needed painting. And there's certainly a newer car in the driveway. So anyway, so this is the house that Dr. Luce built, okay? It is 413 West Pleasant Street in the Historic District, and I know that some of you recognize it and know who lives there now. Who knows who lives there now? Chris Nissen, you got it. So now, keep in mind, they have no children, but Dr. Luce built this beautiful house. He didn't buy it from someone, he built this beautiful house, okay? 3-story house, 413 West Pleasant Street, built in 1894 at the cost of $10,000. That's rent for some people these days, I don't know. And then he paid an additional $1,900 for the lot. So I just have a little information I'll just give you quickly about the house. It's called a stick Queen Anne style, meaning that it's clapboard, interrupted with vertical and diagonal decorative bracing that suggests the interior framing. The architect or builder is not known, but it is thought there must have been a professional designer, because it is really some house. It's interesting to note that as late as 1894, there were still large lots available on Pleasant Street, and also interesting that they were so expensive. And to some, this illustrates the fact that Maquoketa was not as severely affected by the Panic of 1893 as other larger communities were. There are many new ideas used in this house. Water was hand pumped to the attic to provide gravity pressure, and probably this wasn't the first time that was done, because we know Squires Manor, that was done at Squires Manor too, and at one of the big houses in Bellevue. It had a steam heating system with radiators. There was a buzzer system from the house to summon the carriage man who lived above the carriage house, and there was a speaker system between the kitchen and the upstairs to summon the maid. Each bedroom, it doesn't tell us how many bedrooms. Brandon, do you know how many bedrooms? So maybe right. Each bedroom, and there must have been a few bedrooms in this house, right? Each bedroom originally had a marble sink with running water. So pretty outstanding for the time. The interior of the house has white oak or cherry woodwork. It has an open stairway, detailed wainscoting, and thick doors. The entry doors have leaded glass windows, some of which are colored. The dining room has an original Tiffany leaded lamp, a built-in china closet, a buffet, and a lot of wainscoting. The living room has original chandeliers. There are 3 working tile fireplaces. There's a back stairway from the kitchen to the maid's quarters. The house has a full attic. The teardrop design from the eaves and the rail corners is copied inside in the stairway and the foyer chandeliers. There are 3 Queen Anne windows on the 3rd floor. The upper half of the window used smaller panes which were arranged in a different form. There's a bay on one side which extends from the base to the top of the house, a veranda or a covered porch extending around the front of the house. The veranda has a balustrade or an entire railing system with a top rail and posts. The carriage house is what everybody was interested in. The carriage house had a turntable, and you've probably heard about that. That would revolve, so when the carriage was driven in, it could turn 180 degrees and then it could exit forward. And that was important to a doctor who was out in the middle of the night a lot of times with his carriage going on house calls. Others that have lived in this house, and maybe there's more than I know, Hugo Stack, one of our pharmacists, Bert and Zelda Dustall, and of course the current residents are Chris and Mara Nissen. And Mara, I talked to Mara about the house a little bit, only didn't get any pictures, I'm sorry. That can be a whole nother brown bag lunch for somebody, all right? Because this is quite the house. Mara tells us that the first choir rehearsal for the Congregational Church was held in the front west room of this house. Pretty neat. The original Tiffany lamp is still in the house. The dining room has beautiful windows and a pass-through from the kitchen. There are 2 stairways which go 4 directions. I don't quite understand that. A half bath with a rounded door under the stairway and a door to the outside leading to the carriage house. The carriage house is still standing in good repair, but the turntable has been removed. So that's just a little bit that we know about the house. Barb?
At the time that Bert and Zelda Dostal had it, there was a book with the records of everything that had been done to that house over the years.
Really?
The last I knew, the couple they sold it to took it with them when they moved.
Oh, no.
I don't know if it ever came back or not.
Okay.
But anyway,
But
you
that's
can
good
look
to
back
know.
through that book and see everything that had ever been done in that
Wouldn't
house.
that be wonderful? Do you think we could get Chris and Zelda to come and do a program about this amazing house?
They're both dead.
Well,
Chris and Mara.
I meant to say Chris and Mara. I'm sorry. Yes, I know that. I'm sorry. Do you think, I wonder if they would come and do a program for us. Beautiful house, and wouldn't it be fun to see the inside? I can just tell you that, well, let's finish this one first. Anybody else who's been in the house that has memories of it, that has anything to add?
Was that a bed and breakfast for a while?
Yep.
Was it? I don't know the answer.
Because I think
Okay.
that was on the tour of
Yes.
homes one time, and I remember walking through it.
I bet it was on a tour of homes sometime.
Marla Gross had it, didn't she?
Oh, was that the
Yeah.
one that Marla Gross had? Okay.
And then Waits had owned it too.
Okay.
Gordon Waite. Are they the ones you're talking about, Barb, that took the records? No.
Okay.
We ought to get that.
Yeah, we've got to try to track down that record. That's a good thing to know. Thank you. Okay.
Did you say that Dr. Joshua had was
Dr.
it- No.
No,
Dostal.
Dostal. The Dostals had it? Yeah. And Hugo Stack, the druggist, had it after them. But what a beautiful thing, and how wonderful that it's being so wonderfully taken care of and preserved. Hasn't been chopped up into little apartments like happens to a lot of our wonderful big old houses. So thank you to the Nissens for doing such a good job of caring for this house. Okay, any other comments? All right, thank you very much.